I never expected that a broken heater would be the thing to change my life. For years, my existence had been a carefully curated collection of routines, a fortress of solitude built from predictability and quiet control. My apartment was the heart of this fortress, a minimalist space where every book was aligned, every surface was clear, and every day unfolded with the same comforting rhythm. I was a graphic designer, working from a home that doubled as my office, my sanctuary, and, if I was being honest with myself in the deep, silent hours of the night, my cage. My life was a flat, grayscale landscape of my own design. And then there was him. He was a splash of vibrant, impossible color. His name was Liam, and he lived in apartment 4B, one floor above me. He was an architect, a fact I'd learned from a brief, excruciatingly awkward conversation in the elevator where he dropped a tube of blueprints. I'd watched, frozen, as he'd gathered them, the scent of his cologne, something clean and woodsy, like sandalwood and cedar after a rain, filling the small space. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just the weight of his own ambitions. His presence was a quiet, solid thing, grounded and steady in a way that I, with my buzzing anxieties and frantic internal monologues, could only ever dream of being. He was, in the private museum of my mind, the main exhibit. I was the silent, solitary visitor, the curator of 1,000 stolen glances and overheard snippets of his life. I knew the sound of his keys jingling as he checked his mail. I knew the low, rumbling timbre of his voice as he took phone calls in the hallway, the sound vibrating faintly through my own floorboards. I knew he left for a run at 6 every morning, his steady footfalls on the stairs a more reliable alarm clock than my own. I had cataloged these details with the obsessive precision of a lonely man. Each one was a precious artifact, polished and stored away in the quietest corners of my heart. They were proof that something beautiful existed just outside my carefully constructed walls, but they were also a constant, aching reminder of the distance between us. A distance that felt, for all intents and purposes, as vast and uncrossable as an ocean. The barrier, as I saw it, was absolute. He was friendly, of course, but it was the kind of effortless, universal friendliness that beautiful people often possess. He offered a morning in the lobby that was warm but impersonal, a smile that was kind but never lingered. I'd once overheard him on the phone, mentioning a dinner with Anna's parents, and my mind, a relentless architect of its own misery, had immediately constructed an entire life for him. Anna, his beautiful, effortlessly charming girlfriend. Their cozy dinners, their shared laughter, their intertwined lives. He was straight. He was taken. He was a closed exhibit. So I admired him from afar, the way one admires a masterpiece in a gallery. You can appreciate its form, its color, its emotional weight, but you cannot touch it. You cannot possess it. To even imagine doing so felt like a kind of sacrilege. My yearning was a quiet, manageable ache, a hum of static beneath the surface of my orderly days. It was a part of my routine, as predictable as my morning coffee and my evening deadlines. I wanted nothing more, and I expected nothing less. My world was a carefully balanced ecosystem of self-protection. I was the passive observer of my own desires, content to watch life happen from behind the safety of my window. I had convinced myself that this was enough, that the admiration was a substitute for connection, that the safety of my solitude was preferable to the terrifying risk of vulnerability. I had built my walls high and thick, and I believed, with a certainty that now feels like a different kind of cold, that they were impenetrable. The first sign of the coming chaos was a tremor in the pipes, a shudder that ran through the building's old iron veins. Then, a groan. And then, silence. The gentle hiss of the radiator in my living room, a sound so constant I had long ago stopped noticing it, was gone. Its absence was suddenly deafening. I placed a hand against the metal coils. Stone cold. Outside, the city was in the grip of a brutal, record-breaking cold snap. The wind howled with a personal vindictiveness, rattling my window panes like a poltergeist. The temperature on the news ticker plummeted, each descending number a small, sharp stab of dread. My apartment, my fortress, began to betray me. The cold seeped through the walls, through the floor, through the very air I was breathing. It was an invasive, insidious presence, undoing all my careful order. By evening, I could see my breath. I was wearing 3 layers of clothing and huddled under a mountain of every blanket I owned. But the cold was relentless. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was an emotional one. The chill mirrored the isolation I had so carefully cultivated, turning it from a comfortable state of being into a harsh, unbearable reality. My sanctuary had become a tomb of ice. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was empty. The order felt fragile, pointless against such a primal force. I was contemplating a miserable, shivering night trying to sleep on the one-floor vent that still pushed out a ghost of room-temperature air when a knock came at my door. The sound was so unexpected it made me jump, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. No one ever knocked on my door. I unwrapped myself from my cocoon of blankets and peered through the peephole. My breath hitched. It was Liam. He stood in the hallway, a dark blue sweater emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders, his hair slightly damp from the sleet outside. He looked concerned. My mind raced, a flurry of panicked, impossible scenarios. He knew. He somehow knew about my secret museum, and he was here to issue a restraining order. I opened the door a crack, the cold hallway air rushing in like an unwelcome tide. "Hi," I managed, my voice thin and reedy. "Hey," he said, his own voice a low, warm rumble that seemed to push back against the chill. "Sorry to bother you. Just doing a sweep of the floor. You're heating out too." I nodded, unable to form a complete sentence. I was too aware of him standing there, of his solid presence in my doorway, of the faint scent of cedar and damp wool. He was real, not a figment to be observed from a distance. The reality of him was overwhelming. "Yeah, mine's been out since this afternoon," I finally said. He gestured down the hall with his thumb. "The whole building's down. The boiler completely gave out. They're saying it could be a couple of days." He looked at me, his eyes, a warm, clear hazel I'd never been close enough to truly see before, crinkling at the corners with concern. "It's freezing in there, isn't it?" I gave a weak, pathetic laugh. "A bit." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Look, this is going to sound forward," he started, and my heart stopped completely. "But my place is holding its heat a little better, and I've got a pretty powerful space heater. It's still cold, but it's bearable. You shouldn't stay here tonight. It's not safe." He was offering me refuge. He was inviting me inside his life, beyond the lobby, beyond the elevator. The walls of my fortress, already breached by the cold, were threatening to collapse entirely. My immediate instinct was to say no, to thank him and retreat back into my familiar, frozen misery. It was the safe choice, the one that kept the exhibit behind its velvet rope. But the words wouldn't come. I was too cold. I was too lonely. And the quiet hope, a thing I thought I had starved into submission long ago, stirred in the depths of my chest. "I have an extra blanket," he added, as if to sweeten the deal. And I was just about to order Thai food. I looked from his kind, expectant face back into the frigid gloom of my apartment. The choice was between a cold, safe cage and a terrifying, warm unknown. For the first time in a very long time, I chose the unknown. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a puff of white vapor in the air. "Yeah, okay, thank you." His smile was like the sun breaking through a week of winter clouds. It was genuine and relieved, and it was aimed directly at me. For a moment, it was the only source of warmth in the entire world. "Great," he said. "Grab whatever you need. I'm in 4B." As if I didn't already know. Walking into Liam's apartment was like stepping into another dimension, one where order and warmth coexisted in a way I'd never been able to achieve. My own space was sterile, a study in grayscale and sharp angles. His was a world of warm woods, soft textures, and clean, intentional lines that still felt lived in. Books were stacked on a low coffee table, not as props, but as if they were actually being read. A heavy, nubby throw blanket was draped over the arm of a comfortable-looking sofa. The air itself felt different, softer. It smelled of him, that cedar and sandalwood scent, now woven with the faint, pleasant aroma of brewing coffee and old paper. I felt like a ghost, an intruder in this deeply personal space. I stood awkwardly by the door, clutching my overnight bag like a shield, my carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. This was his home, the place where he sketched and slept, and lived a life I had only ever imagined from a distance. Being here, inside it, felt like a transgression. "Make yourself at home," he said, his voice easy and casual, as if having his reclusive downstairs neighbor camp out in his living room was a perfectly normal Tuesday night. He pointed to a small, black machine in the corner, which was humming quietly and emitting a visible wave of heat. "The heater is a lifesaver. Huddle up. I'll get you that coffee." I moved toward the heater, drawn to its warmth like a moth to a flame. The direct blast of hot air on my frozen skin was a revelation. I shed my jacket, feeling clumsy and oversized in his perfectly proportioned living room. Every move I made felt amplified. Every sound I created, the rustle of my bag, the scuff of my shoes, seemed to echo in the quiet space. He returned with 2 heavy ceramic mugs, the steam rising from them in fragrant clouds. He handed one to me, and as I took it, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But for me, it was everything. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm, a spark of heat that had nothing to do with the coffee or the space heater. It was the first time we had ever touched, and the significance of it landed in my chest with a dull, heavy thud. My heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I mumbled my thanks, my eyes fixed on the dark liquid in my mug. I could feel him standing near me, his presence a tangible thing in the air. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the heater and the frantic pounding in my ears. I was hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his breathing, the way the light from the lamp caught the warm tones in his brown hair, the sheer, solid fact of his body occupying the same small pocket of warm air as mine. To break the tension, I gestured vaguely at the large drafting table that dominated one side of the room. It was covered in a chaotic, beautiful mess of blueprints, sketches, and colored pencils. "Is this for a project?" I asked, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. He followed my gaze, and a small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "Yeah, it's a library renovation. And the client is particular." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had witnessed 100 times from my window, but seeing it up close, seeing the genuine weariness in his eyes, was different. It was intimate. "It's driving me a little crazy," he admitted, his voice dropping a little. "I keep staring at these plans, but nothing feels right." That was it. The first crack in the marble facade. The masterpiece had confessed to a flaw. For months, I had seen him as this pillar of effortless confidence, a man who moved through the world with a certainty I could never possess. But here, in the warm sanctuary of his own home, he was just a guy, stressed out by his job, looking tired and vulnerable. It was a revelation that both terrified and thrilled me. It made him more real, and therefore, infinitely more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. He seemed to sense my discomfort, or perhaps he was just a naturally gracious host. "Sorry," he said, shaking his head as if to clear it. "You're here to escape the cold, not listen to me complain about work. The food should be here soon." We ended up eating the Thai food sitting on the floor, our backs against the sofa, because the table was, as he'd said, completely covered. We huddled together in the bubble of warmth from the space heater, our knees occasionally brushing. Each accidental touch sent a fresh jolt through my system. We talked, not about anything profound, just about the building, the ridiculousness of the ancient boiler, the best coffee shops in the neighborhood. It was simple, easy conversation, but for me, it was a monumental effort. I had to consciously regulate my breathing, to force my racing thoughts into coherent sentences, to act like a normal human being and not a man who was cataloging every micro-expression on the face of the person he'd been secretly obsessed with for a year. Later, as the night deepened and the city outside grew quiet, a different kind of silence fell between us. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable, weighted. We were just 2 people, sharing a small space, listening to the wind howl outside. He stared into the red-orange glow of the heater's coils, a thoughtful, distant look on his face. "I hate the cold," he said suddenly, his voice soft. "It always reminds me of my first winter away from home for university. My dorm room heater was always on the fritz. I felt so isolated." He offered this piece of himself so casually, a small, vulnerable confession dropped into the quiet air between us. It was another crack, deeper this time. He was sharing a memory, a feeling. He was letting me see a glimpse of the person beneath the confident architect. My admiration, once a cool, distant thing, was rapidly transmuting into something warmer, something more complex and terrifying. I was no longer in a museum. The velvet ropes were gone. I was standing right in front of the art, and I was beginning to realize it was not made of stone at all. It was made of flesh and blood and lonely memories, just like me. The moment the unspoken question of sleeping arrangements entered the room, the comfortable quiet we had built evaporated. A new kind of tension, sharp and electric, took its place. The logistics were simple and horrifying. One bed, one couch, two people. "You should take the bed," Liam said, his voice carefully neutral as he began clearing away the takeout containers. "It's warmer in the bedroom, further from the windows." "No," I replied too quickly. "No, I can't. It's your bed. I'll take the couch." "It's perfectly fine." My protest was automatic, a defense mechanism born of a deep-seated fear of imposing, of taking up too much space in his life, even for a single night. He stopped what he was doing and turned to face me. "Don't be ridiculous. You're my guest. The couch is not great. You won't sleep at all." "I'm a great couch sleeper," I lied, my voice betraying a hint of desperation. "Really?" Olympic level, the attempt at humor fell flat, landing with a thud in the charged air between us. We stood there for a long moment, locked in a polite, ridiculous stalemate. The hum of the space heater seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between his innate politeness and a more practical solution that was hovering, unspoken, just beneath the surface. "Okay," he finally said, letting out a slow breath. "How about this? The bed is big enough for two. We can just share. For warmth. It's the logical thing to do." He said it so calmly, so rationally. For warmth. A perfectly plausible, entirely practical reason. And yet, the words sent a shockwave through my system. My mind went completely blank, then flooded with a million frantic, contradictory thoughts. It was insane. It was intimate. It was a terrifying proposition. It was an answer to a prayer I had never dared to speak aloud. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to give him an out. I needed him to change his mind, to send me to the couch, to restore the safe and painful distance between us. "I'm sure," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "If you're okay with it." Was I okay with it? It was the most dangerous question I had ever been asked. I nodded, a jerky, uncertain movement. I was not okay. I was the furthest thing from okay. I was a man walking willingly into the heart of a storm, and I could already feel the wind beginning to tear me apart. Lying in his bed felt like a fever dream. The room was dark, save for the faint, cold glow of the city lights filtering through the blinds, casting long, skeletal shadows on the walls. The sheets were cool, but they smelled of him, a clean, subtle scent of soap and laundry detergent and that ever-present hint of cedar. I lay stiff as a board on my designated side, a vast, arctic expanse of duvet separating us. I could hear him breathing beside me, a slow, steady rhythm in the profound quiet. I was acutely aware of the heat his body was generating, a furnace of life just inches away from my own shivering form. The cold in the room was a living thing, pressing in on us, but the warmth emanating from him was a tangible presence, a promise. I clenched my fists under the covers, trying to will my body to stop trembling. It was no use. The shivering was deep, uncontrollable, a physical manifestation of the cold and the fear and the overwhelming, impossible nearness of him. Hours seemed to pass. I listened to his breathing, trying to match its steady cadence, but my own was shallow and ragged. I was trapped between the exquisite torture of his proximity and the gnawing certainty that this was all a terrible mistake. Then he shifted. The mattress dipped, and the continent between us shrank. His voice, when it came, was a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the bed. "You're freezing." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, laced with a tenderness that undid me completely. Before I could respond, he moved again, rolling onto his side to face me. The warmth of his body was suddenly a wall of heat along my back. It was staggering, a shock to my frozen system. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. "This is stupid," he murmured, his voice closer now, near my ear. "We're trying to be polite. and we're both just getting colder. He shifted one more time, and then his arm was around me, pulling me back against his chest. The contact was electric. His body was a solid, grounding weight against mine. I could feel the steady, reassuring beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. The heat soaked into me, chasing away the deep, bone-aching chill. It was overwhelming. It was everything. My carefully constructed walls, the ones I had spent years reinforcing, crumbled into dust. All my routines, all my rules, all my safe distances, they were meaningless now. There was only the darkness, the cold, and the solid, undeniable warmth of Liam holding me. He didn't say anything else. We lay there in silence, his arms securely around me, my back pressed against the solid plane of his chest. My shivering slowly subsided, replaced by a different kind of tremor, one that started deep inside me. Slowly, tentatively, I relaxed into his hold, a silent surrender. I must have drifted off, lulled into a state of semi-consciousness by the warmth and the rhythmic beat of his heart. I wasn't truly asleep, but I was somewhere else, floating in a disbelieving haze. And then I felt his fingers gently tracing patterns on my arm. Slow, deliberate circles that sent shivers of a completely different kind dancing across my skin. My eyes snapped open in the darkness. He thought I was asleep. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just for warmth anymore. This was something else. He shifted slightly, his hand moving from my arm to find my hand under the covers. He laced his fingers through mine. The fit was perfect. His thumb began to stroke the back of my hand, a slow, questioning caress. It was the most tender, most terrifying thing I had ever felt. It was an invitation. A question asked without words in the vulnerable quiet of the night. My world tilted on its axis. My ordered, predictable life was over. This was chaos. This was a free fall. And as I lay there, my hand held firmly in his, I realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity that I didn't want to be saved. I squeezed his hand in return. He took that as the answer it was. He moved, turning me gently to face him. His face was a landscape of shadows and soft light, his eyes dark and serious. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and smelling faintly of mint from the toothpaste he'd used hours ago. He hesitated for a heartbeat, giving me one last chance to pull away, to retreat back to my cold, safe world. I didn't move. The first kiss was impossibly soft. It was tentative, a gentle press of his lips against mine, a question, a discovery. It wasn't hungry or demanding. It was full of a hesitant wonder, as if he were just as stunned by this moment as I was. It tasted of coffee and mint, and something that was uniquely, intoxicatingly him. It was the end of my old life and the beginning of something I had no name for. It was everything I had ever secretly wanted, and I was terrified it would burn me to ash. I woke to the pale, gray light of a winter morning and a suffocating sense of panic. For a moment, disoriented, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The cold, the offer, the bed, the kiss. Liam was still asleep, his breathing a deep, even rhythm beside me. His arm was thrown possessively over my waist, his body still a source of incredible warmth against mine. The scene was one of devastating domestic intimacy. It was a snapshot from a life I had never allowed myself to imagine, and seeing it in the harsh light of day felt like looking directly at the sun. My anxiety, which had been blissfully dormant in the heat of the moment, came roaring back to life. It was a physical thing, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. What had I done? What had we done? The logic of the night, the cold, the proximity, the shared vulnerability, seemed flimsy and ridiculous now. All I could see was the morning after reality. I had kissed my neighbor, my presumably straight, unattainable neighbor. A wave of shame washed over me, hot and sickening. He must regret it. It had been a mistake, a strange aberration brought on by the unusual circumstances. He was probably just being kind, taking pity on the shivering, lonely man from downstairs, and things had just gone too far. He would wake up, and the kindness in his eyes would be replaced with awkwardness, with regret, with pity. I couldn't bear it. I had to escape before that happened. Carefully, moving with the stealth of a thief, I slid out from under his arm. The loss of his warmth was immediate and acute, a shocking return to the cold reality of the room. I gathered my clothes, which I'd left in a heap on the floor, and dressed in the chilly silence of his bathroom. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to see the panic that I was sure was written all over my face. My ordered world was in ruins, and I, the meticulous architect of my own life, had been the one to light the fuse. When I emerged, he was awake. He was sitting up in bed, the duvet pulled around his waist, running a hand through his sleep-mussed hair. The sight was so painfully attractive, so casually intimate, that it felt like a punch to the gut. He looked at me, and his expression was unreadable. The easy warmth from the night before was gone, replaced by a guarded stillness. The space between us, which had been erased in the darkness, now felt like a vast, unbridgeable chasm. "Morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "Morning," I squeaked, my voice tight and unnatural. I couldn't meet his eyes. I busied myself with folding the blanket he had given me, my movements jerky and inefficient. The air was thick with unspoken words, heavy with the memory of what had passed between us. The silence was a crushing weight. My anxiety spiral intensified, my thoughts racing in a frantic, self-destructive loop. I had misread everything. I had taken his kindness and twisted it into something it wasn't. I had ruined the comfortable, distant neighborly friendship we'd had. Now it would just be awkward glances in the hallway and hurried retreats into our respective apartments. I had shattered the beautiful, untouchable exhibit in my museum, and now all I had were the broken pieces. He got out of bed and pulled on a t-shirt. He moved with a stiff, deliberate grace that felt completely different from his usual relaxed confidence. His back was to me as he went to the kitchen to make coffee, and that single act felt like a definitive rejection. He was putting distance between us, both physically and emotionally. He was rebuilding his walls, and they were higher and stronger than mine had ever been. Every silent, mundane action, the clink of a mug, the gurgle of the coffee maker, was confirmation of my worst fears. I had to leave. I needed the familiar, cold safety of my own apartment, where I could lick my wounds in private and try to glue the fragments of my orderly life back together. "I should go," I said, my voice coming out as a strangled whisper. I grabbed my bag, my jacket. "Thanks again for everything. The heater, the food." I couldn't bring myself to mention the rest. I was at the door, my hand on the knob, my escape imminent, when his voice stopped me. It was quiet, but it cut through the thick tension in the room like a knife. "Wait." I froze, my back still to him. I braced myself for the inevitable. The apology. "I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression. Let's just forget this happened." "Adam," he said, using my name for the first time. "Turn around. Please." Slowly, reluctantly, I turned. He was standing in the middle of the room, his coffee mug held in both hands. He looked just as nervous as I felt, his knuckles white where he gripped the ceramic. The confident, self-assured architect was gone, replaced by someone who looked vulnerable and uncertain. "We should talk," he said. My stomach plummeted. This was it. The final blow. I gave a small, defeated nod, preparing myself for the rejection I knew I deserved. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "Last night," he began, then stopped, searching for the right words. It wasn't just about the cold. I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. That wasn't what he was supposed to say. "I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for months," he confessed, his voice low and earnest. He finally met my eyes, and his gaze was intense, full of a sincerity that made my head spin. "I see you in the lobby, or by the mailboxes. You always look so serious, so self-contained. I didn't know how to approach you." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I'd see you looking at me sometimes, but I always convinced myself I was imagining it. I figured you weren't interested. Or that you weren't, you know." He gestured vaguely between us. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. "So when the heating went out," he continued, his eyes not leaving mine, "I saw it as an opportunity. A really stupid, dramatic, rom-com level opportunity, but I couldn't pass it up. I wasn't just being a good neighbor, Adam. I wanted an excuse to get you in my apartment. I wanted a reason to talk to you." The entire narrative I had constructed in my head, the one where I was a pathetic, lonely man pining after an unattainable straight guy, began to dissolve. It was a flimsy fiction, and he was tearing it apart, sentence by vulnerable sentence. A single, foolish question bubbled up, the last remnant of my self-protective delusion. But, Anna, I whispered, the name feeling foreign and ridiculous on my tongue. He looked completely bewildered. Anna? Who's Anna? I heard you on the phone once, I explained, feeling my cheeks burn with a deep, profound embarrassment. You said you were having dinner with Anna's parents. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a slow, gentle smile that completely transformed his expression. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. Oh, he said, and he actually chuckled, a low, warm sound. Anna is my sister. That was dinner with my sister and my brother-in-law. He took a step closer. I've been single for over a year, and for the last 6 months of that, I've been trying to work up the courage to ask out the quiet, intense graphic designer from 3B who I think I might be completely falling for. The relief was a physical sensation. It was a dam breaking, a weight lifting, a breath I didn't even know I was holding being released in a shaky, silent exhale. The cold knot of anxiety in my stomach unfurled, replaced by a blossoming, incredulous warmth. I thought you were straight, I confessed, the words tumbling out now that the dam was broken. I thought you had a girlfriend. I've been watching you for a year, from my window, in the lobby. I know you run at 6 every morning. I know you like sandalwood. I thought you were this perfect, untouchable person, and I was just the weird guy downstairs. All my secret observations, my carefully curated artifacts, came pouring out in a messy, vulnerable flood. I was laying myself bare, showing him all the hidden, lonely corners of my heart. He closed the remaining distance between us, his smile now full of a tenderness that made my knees feel weak. He gently took my face in his hands, his palms warm against my skin. You're not the weird guy downstairs, he said softly. You're the guy I couldn't stop thinking about. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was not a question. It was a definitive, resounding answer. It was deep and sure and full of all the words we had been too afraid to say. It was relief and recognition and a profound sense of rightness. It tasted like coffee and hope. It felt like coming home. The heat came back on the following afternoon. A clank and a shudder ran through the building, followed by the familiar, glorious hiss of the radiators coming back to life. My apartment slowly began to shed its icy shell, but the idea of returning to it, to my solitary fortress, felt wrong. The space between my apartment and his had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a measure of floors and stairs, but a path I now knew how to cross. I moved my things back to my own place, but it felt different. The silence was no longer comforting. It felt empty. The order seemed less like a sanctuary and more like a sterile environment, lacking the warm, lived-in chaos of Liam's life. That evening, he knocked on my door. This time, I didn't hesitate to open it. He was holding a bag of takeout, the same Thai place as before, and a smile that made my chest ache with a new, joyful kind of vulnerability. My place or yours? He asked. It was a simple question, but it held the weight of our new beginning. We were starting to navigate this new dynamic, learning the steps to a dance we had only just discovered. We ate at my small, perpetually clear dining table, an act that felt revolutionary. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps that my one-sided observations had left. I learned that his confidence was a well-practiced shield for his own anxieties about his work. He learned that my quietness was not aloofness, but a defense against a world that often felt too loud. The following weeks were a study in quiet intimacy. We fell into a new routine, one that was intertwined and infinitely better than my old one. Mornings started with a shared coffee in his apartment before he left for his run. Evenings were spent either in my quiet space, where he would watch me work on a design, tracing the lines on my screen with a gentle finger, or in his, surrounded by his blueprints and sketches, the scent of cedar and paper a constant, comforting presence. He never made me feel like my anxiety was a burden. When I would start to overthink, to spiral into doubt, he would simply reach for my hand, his touch a grounding force that pulled me back to the present, back to the solid, reassuring reality of him. He saw the walls I had built around myself, not as a fortress to be conquered, but as a part of my architecture, and he gently, patiently, helped me find the windows. One evening, a few weeks later, a chill crept into my apartment. It was nothing like before, just the normal draftiness of an old building, but I shivered. Liam, who was sitting beside me on the sofa, looked over and raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in his eye. "Heater acting up again?" he asked, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. I laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh. "It's a little cold in here." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "Well," he said, his lips brushing against my temple, "we could always share for warmth." The callback, our inside joke born from a moment of crisis, felt like a foundation stone being laid. It was proof that we were building something real, something with a shared history, however short. We were taking the memory of a cold, desperate night and turning it into a source of warmth and humor. As I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my side, I thought about the man I had been just a few weeks ago, the curator of a lonely museum, a man who believed that safety was found in solitude and that admiration was an acceptable substitute for love. I had structured my life to avoid risk, to prevent the messy, unpredictable chaos of human connection. I had lived behind walls of my own making, admiring life from a safe, sterile distance. The cold snap hadn't just broken the building's boiler. It had broken me open. It had forced me out of my fortress and into the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of letting someone else in. I had learned that true warmth has nothing to do with radiators or space heaters. It's the heat of a hand in yours in the dark. It's the steady presence of someone who sees you, all of you, and chooses to stay. My world was no longer perfectly ordered, and my heart was no longer perfectly safe. And for the first time in my life, that felt like a victory. The chaos was beautiful,